What is going on, guys? Welcome to the Wednesday night live stream. How the heck is everybody doing tonight? Gao Gao, haven't seen you in ages. Welcome to the stream. Palm Tree, Rob B, what is going on, guys? So by special request, I decided to talk about coral placement today and kind of different things around it, like coral warfare and aesthetically, what's going to look the best where, what's going to be the healthiest for the coral in returns to like lighting, color contrast, flow. There's a lot of different things you got to kind of think about and consider. Macy's Daddies, what's happening? Aquabells, welcome. So if you guys have any questions I go, feel free to ask as always. What's going on, Tony? So coral placement. When I first started out in the hobby, everyone starts off, what's going on, John, with little sticks, right? Everyone gets their little nub frags, and you want your tank to look full, so you pack them in there, you put everywhere, and as you get more addicted to corals, you buy more and more little sticks, and as you do, you got to find more spots for it. But when you first start out of the hobby, you don't consider when stuff grows, and this is something that I ran into, and most of my tank upgrades have been because I've ran out of coral space. Now, a big mistake that I've done on almost every tank is put corals too close together, right? It looks awesome when they're just little tiny sticks, but as they grow in, they all need space. If you look at, a couple like the millies that I have, now it's like, they're massive, some of them now, and they're can overshadow its neighbor, and you got to kind of frag it to bonsai reef keeping in a sense to kind of keep things looking good. Bob from Texas. What's going on, Bob? Welcome. Scuba Steve. Drop a like while you're here. Thank you, good sir. All right. St. Nova put acros and 250, 300 par, and they're looking pale. So another part of coral placement, if you're buying corals like acros from somebody and they're in low light and you drop it into highlight all of a sudden, you are potentially shocking that coral. You need to adapt into it. Now, if you have 200 par and it came from a tank that had 300 or 400 par, it's not a big deal, right? You're not going to shock it as much. It's easier to go down. It's harder to go up. You want to ease it into it more. Brian Carls, thanks for all the info you posted. It's been indispensable as I've been starting my tank. Awesome. Thank you very much for the $5 super chat, Brian. Much appreciated. And yeah, as always, man, let me know any questions. Always happy to help. Okay, so coral placement. First thing is first is you do want to consider two things. What is the growth pattern of the coral over time? How is it going to grow? So that's one thing. And two, how much space does it need? So putting stuff too close together, corals here, corals there, that's going to be an issue, right? Put them on either side, you're going to have longer. So eventually you're going to have an issue, but it's how long until you get there. Tony, is it normal for acros to slime after a water change? It can be, especially if they're drained down and they're out of water, then they will definitely slime up for a bit. If they're submerged the whole time, then generally not as often. So a couple things to consider. Steve from Trinidad, welcome. Now, the other big thing to consider is, are they going to fight? So if you take a look at the photo that I had in the thumbnail, which is, let me find it and pull it up. Okay, so that guy. So if you take a look at that, that is coral warfare at its finest. If we look at that, we got the Sunset Monty being attacked by the Robias. I can never remember the name of that one, but it's whatever one's on the Tropic Marine Buck. That's the only reason I remember. It starts with an R. Marvin Jones, $10 super chat. Thank you very much, sir. So corals generally fight in two ways. One is they're going to grow on top of each other. So generally they will try and crowd each other, or they'll block it from light, and that will kill it off that way. Now, another way they can do it is releasing kind of little toxins, like they're almost spitting out their guts in a way, and you can see it here, is it's spewing it out over to the next guy, and it's using that to attack it. So this acro is attacking that Monty, and it's basically killing it off, and as it does, it's growing closer, so it's slowly encroaching on its space, and you can kind of see that little curve around the outside of where it's doing it, which is kind of crazy. Okay, so there's that. Now, another thing to consider, if you're doing a mixed reef tank, if you have lots of softies in your tank, some softies can release a toxin to the water, which is theorized to slow down the growth of acros. And that's kind of how it slows them down so that it can outgrow them and take over. Now, to counteract that, you can do something like running carbon in your tank. that definitely will absorb the toxin. You can do ozone is what I personally do, because the ozone will break down the toxins and it makes it easier for your skimmer to remove it, or a combination of the two. But so that's one thing to consider. Now, another big aspect is color of corals. If you put two red corals side by side or two green corals side by side, they're not going to pop. They're going to blend together. And if you have contrasting colors, it really makes stuff stand out. Like, for instance, if you look at this photo, you see the green beside the blue and purple, that really pops. But then I have like a purple and a blue one just right there, and you can barely tell a difference on them because they blend in so much. Where's that good? A good example of it somewhere in here. Oh yeah, so here's another good one, right? So we got the Euphyllia with the mushrooms in the back, but the green beside the orange, because they're contrasting colors, it really makes it pop. How do I like the ozone machine? Ozone is great. Okay, so I am a big fan of ozone. It gives you super duper crystal clear water. I know with carbon, if it's too dusty, you don't rinse it. It's theorized to do head and lateral line disease. So I still do use it once in a while, but I kind of use ozone as the daily maintenance type of thing. The other part of it too is it does cut down odors from the tank. So if your tank smells fishy and stuff, wife complains, I'm like, okay, turn up the ozone a smidge. But for the most part, I use it just because for me, number one reason, crystal clear water. Secondary reason would be either coral warfare will help get rid of any potential toxins, or if there's any odors in the tank, I'll get rid of that. So two different things to consider there. Todd Rick, I've had green slimer for 4 months now. I take a pic monthly. Has not grown upwards, but has encrusted for a bit. Okay, so it depends on the coral. I've had some that do the exact same thing. There is many corals that they won't grow up until they've encrusted and have a solid base first. There is a really funny one, that little chunk of Walt Disney, and it has done next to nothing for nubs, but it's like a solid little base growing outwards, which I'll find a photo of that one in a bit. I have one somewhere. But yeah, so some corals definitely will. They'll base before they'll grow up. Now, another consideration is the way you mount corals. If you mount a coral straight up and down, it's more likely to base out first because that's going to give it more light. If you put it at a 45, it might start basting and growing as well because it's getting that light energy at the same time as it's kind of basting out. So it's a couple other things to consider. So like this guy, for instance, he has been basing out for ages and there's been next to nothing for vertical growth. But if we look in this bottom corner here, you can see him starting to get little nubs of growth. But that was ages of it basting out. So some corals just definitely do that. Now this is a Hellfire Millie. If we look on the other side of the tank, I have some other Millies and they have been growing like crazy. See if I can find a picture of those guys. But yeah, it's different corals too will have different growth patterns to an extent. But if we look, you can't see it. I'll find a photo of that one in a little bit. But they definitely can, they'll grow like crazy, hardly any basting. So it really depends. I don't buy, shouldn't go with red. Look for fall colors and you'll have a large selection of reds and yellows. Where does Cyphastria live? Cyphastria, if you look at this by tank, it's actually on the opposite side over here. So Cyphastria can handle lower light. That one is fairly universal. They generally don't like a ton of light. They generally like kind of low to medium light. And I'll usually put those low to mid tank and kind of use those to fill in different spots. Now, two other things you got to consider is how much light does the coral like? So obviously acros can handle more up. Now, even with that, certain acros will have different requirements. Or rather, they'll get different coloration in different parts of the tank. So I've had some where, what's a good one? One of the bird's nests, I think it's Ponape bird's nest. That one has better coloration in more of a medium light. And it doesn't, you get more of the greens and purples, where if it's up high, it doesn't actually look quite as good. Or no, Birds of Paradise rather, one of those ones. But it actually, I find it looks way more colorful in lower light than it does in higher light. So you gotta take that consideration with some. Insta-T, how do you mount GSP on a rock? Do you have to frag it? Is there a slimy structure that sticks to the rock? Okay, so just use glue, crazy glue, super glue. Put a little dot on the back. It's kind of that purpley matte that the GSP grows on. And I've glued it to rocks, fried plugs, all kinds of stuff, and it will naturally grow over time. It's also fairly easy to remove. You can literally just peel it off. So you can peel it, move it. Ideally, I would advise not putting it on your main rock because eventually it will try and grow over top of other stuff. So I always like to keep that one on an island. Health whistle, I've got Monty with yellow and red polyps. Now it's diluted 200 300 power. What could cause this? So that might actually be too much power for your Monty. So lots of Monties, depending on the type. A lot of the encrusting ones will, I find they do a bit better in lower light. They'll have a bit better colors. Now, another interesting thing is your light. So I know I've talked about in the past DLI, so daylight intensity. That's your light energy for the day. Now, if you have Monty in low light, it's more likely to plate outwards. If you have certain Monties in high light, will actually spiral more upwards like a cone. So basically, if they need more light, they'll plate outwards more, so they have more surface area for light. Do Zoas sting acros? They're covering some really nice rock. They probably could. I personally haven't had that much of an issue. I do have lots of Zoas that are touching acros, and for the most part, they're fine. They probably do sting it, but I don't think it's potent enough to be a big issue, at least in my experience with them. Now another thing with this. So my latest tank, I still, there's lots of things I could improve, but the placement versus color is a big thing that I'm starting to pay more attention to, and I wish I did more in the past. But if you just look, you know, they got like the green slime beside the rainbow clove polyps, like it pops. It's all about the contrasting colors, and that's one thing that when I'm putting new corals in, where it goes, a chunk of it is based on kind of what colors. Like, hey, like look at all the Zoas. What stands out to you the most? Like for instance, if we look up here, the radioactive dragon eyes, the green one, and the other guy beside it, like those are contrasting colors, so they really pop. Same with these guys in the middle. If you see the green with like the totally mind blanking all the names right now, but that contrast really pops. So contrasting colors is, I think, really important to pay attention to for like kind of long term. It just makes all your corals stand out rather than blending in. Like one that I wish I did differently. For instance, if we look at this guy, we got the Sleda Monty right beside the green goblin one, and they blend in together. Like they're too similar of a green, too close together. Let's see if I can find a better photo of it. Yeah, so in my opinion, that was bad placement on my part because the green beside the green is too similar. It doesn't stand out. Where if we look at beside, we got the green and we got the pink from the red dragon, those colors pop. You know, you got the yellow tang by the torch, like the contrasting colors. So that's one little thing that I would have changed again or paid more attention to next time going forward. For me, flow is most important and the hardest placement. Light is easy. No, I would agree. Okay, so flow, light and flow are your two biggest things, right? And obviously stable parameters. So those are like the three core foundations of happy coral, happy reef tank. Now, where you're placing corals, so LPS or Euphyllia, for example, like your torches, your hammers, your frog swan, they like decent flow, but you can't be blasting them, right? You can't be blasting the flesh off of them. Where if you look at something like an acro, it can handle a lot more flow. Now, even then, certain acros can handle more flow than others. So if you see, you know, certain reseeders having issues, you're potentially blasting with too much flow. And now actually on these guys right here, the whole reason I put these here was originally because this is like a couple inches below my MP60. You get tons of flow. And I know the Sunset Monty can handle it. And eventually I kind of put it in the corner so it grew outwards. And eventually I learned about that tropic marin, the rub boil, I can never remember the name. Anyways, that guy can handle crazy amounts of flow. So I put it right in front of the MP60, happy as a clown. So certain corals can definitely handle much more flow. And it is something you got to consider. And especially like in my tank, how it angles up from right to left, like starting at the top right, it's more acros because that's where all my flow is. And then it gets more softies. Like there's still acros there to, you know, roughly the coffee cup area. I got some acros there, but it gets more kind of softy, easier corals as the tank goes where there's less flow for it. Best way to kill Monticlav. Physically remove it. I mean, good old kelp paste will kill almost anything. Or super glue, or glue something else over top of it, right? Blocking it from light. Lemon angelfish. Lemon peel angelfish. They're really pretty. I have not had one, but they're really cool fish. Just rearrange my reefscape, all the fish are pissed off. Yeah, so you're kind of resetting their homes and their caves. So you basically probably just made all their homes disappear on them, and I got to find new caves. I mean, if you add a new fish, can be a good way to like mix it up and help tone down some of the turf wars, right? Because it's all kind of like a fair game. Everyone trying to go for new spots all of a sudden. Yeah, that's a good photo. But yeah, so I mean with like color contrast, just how contrasting colors beside each other make a huge difference. That and Rainbow Monty, I hear it likes more light and flow. I've had Rainbow Monty in both. I'm gonna say that one doesn't really care. I've had it high flow, low light, highlight, and Rainbow Monty's always has been pretty easy and pretty happy for me. So I would say that corals are not very picky at all. Had to reset their house. No, definitely. And then, well, that's a big good one. Yeah, so okay, you can kind of see the end cap, bit of an older photo, but so you got the clam, got the torches, and as you get closer and closer to the back, we go up to higher and higher flow. What's the best way to tell your acros are thriving and not just surviving? Does new growth look a bit transparent flesh? Okay, so new growth is generally lighter tips at the end of your corals. If we look at, say, this branch down here, you can see how it is a little bit whiter. So the whiter is kind of your growth tip. So it will be a little more pale. And that generally is that. Basically, if the polyps are out, if you're noticing it grow, you know, it's going to be, I'm going to say, more thriving. If it's existing and it hasn't grown in months, then it's, you know, just surviving. And the clam is so big. Yeah, that is a huge clam. It's super cool. I love that guy. Yeah, beautiful colors too. Super cool clam. What's going on, Bahama Llama? Hammers polyp bailing out for some reason. Although other euphyllias are fine. Too much flow. Okay, possibly too much flow, but more likely when I've seen polyp bail out in the past, it's generally been from a big swing. It could be a huge temp spike. It could be an alkalinity swing. But in my experience, it's generally been from a big swing of something in your tank. Could be out, could be temperature. Those are the most things. I haven't seen it happen because of flow. Generally, if a hammer is getting too much flow, it'll start to recede more than bail out. So you'll just start to see the flesh start to get closer and closer to the head, and that's usually a sign that it's not happy. But yeah, the clam's super cool. Love the clams. The head's been getting nipped out a little bit lately. This for me, some of the tanks, some of the fish. It's still open. It kind of goes in spurts if it opens super big or stays a bit smaller, but it's definitely a beauty. Let's see. Yeah, so Kyle, I like to make sure I can see some slow variations in all the polyps of the acros. So if your polyps are out and you can watch them, like, you know, dance around and move around, that's definitely a good sign. It means they're happy. So one of the good ways to look at it or think about it is if you don't have enough flow around your coral, it actually has a bit of like a boundary layer around it. And as the flow is kind of hammering through it, it's breaking out that boundary layer, which is one, moving waste away from your corals, and two, bringing like kind of fresh nutrients and fresh stuff to your coral. If you don't have enough of that, the water's kind of like bouncing around it rather than getting directly to it. That's why high flow is really important to corals. I'm sure there's a lot more to it, but that's kind of like my high level understanding of it. And yeah, flow is definitely something that you do want to have a lot of. Now, another thing too is like just to know if a coral's happy, once all the polyps out is a good sign. So, you know, all those little polyps out means, in my experience, I'd say it's pretty happy. Especially though in the day. I know a lot of people say they only see them out at night. I do think this is partially training, partially feeding it. I feed my tank when the lights are on, you know, broadcast feed it. And that's also going to give the coral some food, which one trains them to feed in the daytime. Now, a bit of a caveat is possible that you could have a fish picking at your corals. And if you have a fish that's munching on polyps in your coral, they're going to be pulled in, right? So it could be not the best representation if you have one of those opportunistic fish who's munching and picking at them. Now, I generally find as long as you feed your tank fairly well, I mean, you're going to have to make sure that you're handling your nutrients. But as long as you feed the tank fairly well, then the fish are less likely to pick at corals. And like that's when you have those like reef safe with caution, that's a big thing that I think is important to consider. Ghouls, I have a plate coral that's 2 smaller plates growing off of it. Do they just break off on their own, or should I remove them? If it's the same coral growing off of it, that's normal. Sometimes they'll do another spiral, another part growing out. It looks more natural and gives it a cool look if you leave it, but I mean, you could take it off if you wanted, your choice. Supporting the specs tonight. Yes, I am. What's going on, Carlos? But yeah, generally, if you see the polyps moving and flowing, generally means they're happier. So it's something that I like to see. Goniopora, another one I get a lot of questions about. I do love the Goni Garden. These guys, they're kind of about medium flow. I'm going to say lower to medium light. I keep them all low in the tank. You can move them up. They do like to be fed. I don't directly spot feed them very often for the most part. I feed PE mice majority of the time, sometimes mixing Canalus. That's kind of like my daily thing. And then, once, twice a week, I'll mix in some reef nutrition or other small particulate foods, some reef roids, that type of thing. But I don't do that very often. I do it maybe like, I don't know, some weeks I'll be ambitious. I'll do it a few weeks, other weeks I forget and don't do it. But a lot of these little guys, they like the little particles out of the water. So I wouldn't say it is necessary to feed them, but they are happier if you do. And they're more likely to keep those polyps out and flowing and happy if they get that bit of nutrition from food as well. I am doing well, thank you, Carlos. Same with torches. Torches are kind of low to medium flow. Now, in the wild, torches generally come from much dirtier water than we keep our tanks. It's usually a lot more turbid, a lot more stuff. So they're also getting a lot more food from that. In our tanks, they tend to be pretty darn sterile these days. And I do think that is an issue for some coral, especially LPS and certain ones. What's happening, Nick? Lucas, with my move, the only coral that didn't make it to the tank happy is the Euphyllia. And take it out, place in a bowl of aminos and reefroids. Any other suggestions? If there is a bacterial suggestion, I have been told this. I tried it on one coral, but it was already going downhill, so it didn't save it. But I have been told if there is a bacterial infection annoying it, you can use some ChemiClean with a little bubbler and use that as a coral dip. So apparently that works well if you have something starting to recede a bit for an LPS. Now, it didn't work in my one case, but it was on a plate coral I tried. It was pretty far gone, so I didn't really expect it to. But that could be something to try if it's not recovering at all. But force feeding it small particulate food, putting it in a little bottle and doing a dip and doing that with aminos, again, that can definitely help. Just don't overfeed it, because that is also an issue I've seen where you put too much food into kind of the stomach, and if it doesn't eat it or absorb it, it can kind of rot inside and cause issues. Do I sell frags? I trade corals once in a while. So usually, to be honest, I don't really ship anything, but if anyone's local, I'll trade and do other stuff. I keep my torches high up to close where my acros are at. Yeah, so in this tank, I have my torches fairly high up as well. They're definitely up there. And for the most part, they're happy up there. Looking this back at the Instagram, it's crazy. Like, this guy is huge compared to what was in the photo. It's cool. If you take photos of your tank, it's cool to see how things change over time and see the progression of things. I find it really neat. Small corner that's just receding, super observant, but I guess I can go with what the word serious suggested, obsessed. We are all obsessed on this hobby. Who are we kidding here? Okay, Chris, how do I control my GSP and Kenya trees? I've clipped the Kenya tree, but still out of control. Kenya tree grows pretty fast. I mean, it's not a lot you can do other than chop it. So Kenya trees, a lot of the soft corals, you can just literally just go in there with some scissors and snip off a big branch. Like, they're really easy to frag. The only big consideration is when you do that, it will release some toxins to the water. So you do want to run something like carbon afterwards. So keep that in mind if you are fragging soft corals in your tank. Definitely use carbon. If you can remove it out and frag it in like a little tub of water, that will be better than fragging it in your tank. But yeah, same with GSP. GSP grows fast. That one, you could frag that in the tank. I don't personally find that one to cause an issue with other corals other than trying to grow over top of it. But GSP, you can literally like peel it off or use a little razor or something, or a credit card, something to like get the edge up. And for the most part, it peels off. Same with pulsing xenia. Again, these are ones that are hard to control. They will spread. I love pulsing xenia. I find it mesmerizing, super beautiful coral, but I've never had it to my tank for fear of it like taking over. So if you're going to do GSP or a xenia, I always advise to keep it on an island, right? You got your scape, put it on a rock in the front, have it be its own little field mound thing, and then it's not less of a risk of overgrowing other stuff. So I haven't personally tried this, but I did have a buddy that swore that xenia only grew upwards, not downwards. Don't know if that's true, but he had his at the very top corner of his tank, and for the most part, it kind of stayed to that area. So might be something worth trying, either an island, or if it doesn't turn a rock, try and keep it the highest point, and you might get luck. Look how tiny those acros are there looking back. That's in June. That says June. Here's a more recent one. It's crazy how much something have changed. Nick, £8.99 super chat. Down payment for our ReefDudes t-shirt. Nick, we'll work on getting you one soon. That'll be good. Thank you, buddy. Much appreciated. Don't ever add xenia. Yeah, I've always been afraid of xenia. I'm scared of it taking over. But it's beautiful. Like, one day I'm going to do a tank with nothing but xenia. I remember seeing one that was, literally just xenia, and it was a sunlit, and it was just like a cool little tank. One day I'm going to try it. Have you ever had to deal with hydroids? I have in freshwater. To be honest, I've only ever seen one in a saltwater tank, and I just sucked out the water change hose, and I never saw one again. So, started my xenia on an island. Yep, I have the weed seed every time I do a water change to keep it off the acros. I've put a lot of zoas on my rocks, various places with SPS, starting to think that might be a mistake and cause damage. It might, but for the most part, I haven't found it to be an issue. I'm sure there's going to be some species that are more aggressive in zoas. There's going to be some acros that will get more pissed off than others. But in general, I haven't found them to be too big of an issue. But I'll let you know. I have a little frag of Marvin the Martian growing with zoas all around it, so it's just poking through it. So that'll be a really good test subject to let you guys know in a month or two and see how that fares. Flame hawks too. Absolute creep. I love it. Flame hawkfish have such a cool personality. You walk up to the tank and they literally will just like stare at you like, oh, what's going on out there? Even when I was filming like this little clip today for the background, just one of the corals, he's up there and literally he's out there just like, what you doing? And I think one of the other clips I did, I'll use in another stream. Same thing. He's out there just super curious guys. Okay. So this guy right here, Marvin the Martian, you can see right there, there's nothing around him. Now he's surrounded by zoas. So the base will be hidden. It's only going to be poking out a little bit. And we'll find out how it does. I'll let you guys know in like a month. Tracy, holy smokes, buddy. Thank you. Weekly support. Keep the good work. Love my xenia. Thank you so much, Tracy. Much appreciated, buddy. I think the best place to put corals in is an aquarium. Yes, it is. Okay, now, corals, aquarium. You obviously need 3 things for them to thrive and be happy. Stable parameters, mainly elk, but the rest of the stuff matters too, but elk's the most important, right? You need half decent light, depending what you're keeping. I mean, softies, LPS, you can probably get away with whatever. You got acros, you might want something with a little more juice, and decent flow. Those are kind of the main things, right? Those are the 3 things that keep corals happy. They're no big secret. That is the 3 cornerstones of a happy reef tank. Now, lots of other stuff's nice to have, but those are the main things. Like even things on like trace elements. You don't need to dose them, but you can tweak the colors slightly. That's like more advanced stuff, but it's not like a requirement for like basic corals to have a happy tank. Nice glasses. Why, thank you. Marcus Reef. I want one, but they will eventually kill shrimp. So this is true. Now, on that note, I got a flame hawkfish along with a coral banded shrimp from the exact same person from the exact same tank. I was like, how did those survive together? He's like, oh, they've been together for a long time. So I added them both to my tank, and they were happy for a while. And eventually my one coral bandit disappeared. But you can see super cool characters. They're always curious. Like, I don't know. I love the flamehawks. They're really cool. But they definitely... This guy disappeared from my tank. And I got them from the same person. One of the flames and the coral bandit together. So they're in there for ages together. So Rob B, thanks for the great topic. Thank you very much for the super chat, Rob. Much appreciated. Thank you very much. So, flame hawkfish, super cool, but your shrimp will likely disappear at some point in time. So, something to consider. Now, that's the other trade-off too, right? Again, like, I love dwarf angelfish. Like, I have a coral beauty in my tank. And for the most part, he's a great fish. But once in a while, I will see him pick at stuff. And, you know, if I don't have polyps on a coral, it very well could be because the coral beauty is nipping at the polyps or, you know, pissing it off, and then it's going to stay retracted for a while. So it's another thing you got to pay attention to with your fish selection. Now, same thing with my copper band. He does pick at the odd thing, but overall he's pretty good. So, reefing with me. Never found Bergia egg spirals like yours. Also, all my Bergia are gone. Now, okay, so if you have fish that ate your Bergia, quite possible. That being said, I added like 15 or so to my frag tank. I put about half in the tank, half in the sump. And I have a wrast in there, Melanaris wrast, and I didn't have a ton of hope for the ones in the tank. I saw one in there last week. And I think, I can't remember if this was the sump or if it was the main tank. But super cool clip, a little guy from last week. So, and this was with the wrast swimming around and he was still there. So there is hope. You never know. They are fairly reclusive. They tend to only come out at night. Like this clip was in the morning before the lights came on. And these guys are tiny and they do hide a lot. So it is possible they are still in there. I kind of thought that, oh, all my Bergia are gone. I'm buggered. And then one day I saw two in the side of the sump and I saw an egg spiral and I was super happy. So there is definitely still hope. Unless you have very aggressive fish that are hunting them down, like you have peppermint shrimp or something, they'll probably hunt them down. You know, wrasses are likely to, but there's hope. They're really good hiders. Now, they also take a long time to go after Aptasia. I have a bazillion Aptasia in my zoas. It's like a freaking Aptasia farm in there. I haven't fragged or touched my zoas in so long because they're just covered in Aptasia. So I'm hoping these guys will eventually get to numbers where they can put a dent in and get rid of it. So just think when they are gone, all of your Aptasia disappear. Yeah, so as long as you have food in the tank and they haven't all been eaten, then there's still hope. So far, the purple Monty has killed the green encrusting Monty. Purple and red Monties grow pretty fast. Actually, I'd say red's probably the fastest grower than purple, straight off. But yeah, they can definitely grow on top of each other. So it is food for thought. I got those nippers and fellows in the dungeon. But yeah, so I put half in my sump, so hopefully eventually we'll see a bunch. But I felt like I posted, yeah, there you go. So that's what the eggs look like. So if you do have them, they do lay their eggs in a little spiral. And if you do see those, that's a good sign because you know that they're in there somewhere and you got some hope. Yellow highlight. Okay, so Mike the noob. I have a yellow highlighter hammer that's really bright 3 weeks ago when I got it. It's getting dull over time. Not sure if it needs more or less light. How would you figure that out? Okay. How much light do you have it in now, Mike? If you have a par meter, do you have like a rough idea of what it is now? So generally with corals, hammers I don't find change that much, but certain coral will really color up with eating food. So for instance, acans or micromousses, they will get far superior better color by feeding them. They tend to be very basic, you know, one or two colors if you never feed them, and then you feed them and all of a sudden you're like, oh, there's all these new colors coming out of it, and it can make it look like completely different things. So like acans, like there's certain corals that really benefit from feeding, and that's one of the biggest ones I'd say for sure. Reefing with Mike, no aggressive fish, no peppermint. Thanks for the vote of confidence. Yeah, I think there's a good chance that they're in there somewhere, but they're just hiding. Monty versus Setosa. That's a good question, actually. I've had them both growing together, to be honest. I think I actually have a frag with a Monty and a Setosa growing together. Neither one has stung each other, but it looks like the Setosa is starting to grow over top of the green Monty a little bit. So now, at the end of the day, with those two, honestly, I don't think it's much of a stinging battle, but it's going to be who's going to grow over top of the other one. And they're just going to win by shading the other one out for light. So, one consideration there. I need a frag tank too, but way too many frags a year ago. Sounds about right. I'll grow it a bit and are approaching each other. I'll probably have 50 corals and a 100-gallon tank. Hey, it's good. Can never have too many corals. That is a good excuse to upgrade. Okay, so about 130 par. Like a hammer should be happy in 130 par. Like this is my, looks a bit greeny yellow in the picture, but this is my gold hammer. It's probably only getting around 100 and something par, so it's pretty similar to yours, to be honest. Make sure it has, you know, decent movement from flow. But yeah, I honestly, unless you're blasting it with light and it's starting to pale out from that, like losing its zooxanthellae, other than that, I wouldn't think that's too much par at all for it. So I'd look at something else maybe. Another thing you do is try just moving it to a different spot. Another thing you got to consider when you are buying corals is if you look at a photo of a coral. That's one thing that drove me nuts early in the hobby. I ordered a Zoa for like, it was like $100 to spend on this Zoa. And it was like Armor of God or something like that. And it looked amazing in the photo. I got the coral, looked nothing like the photo. I was so mad. I was like, what the hell? I'm like, this should be $10 on $100. So mad about that. Now, another thing you got to consider too is the spectrum. If you take a picture, I don't know if any good ones. Like if you have all your blues on and pump it up, and then you take a photo of the whites, your coral's going to look completely different. Even the color spectrum of the camera will make a difference. Like if I, you know, drag my color slider of, you know, from like 5,000, 6,000, 8,000, that's going to change the hue of the coral. So a lot of stuff like that can make a huge difference in it. So something I'd look spare, especially buying stuff online. If it's in your own tank, obviously you're going to see it day to day, and you'll know what it looks like at certain times. Nick, you can stress the coral slightly by changing the light spectrum to more green, and it will stimulate it in nutritional use, and minimize and readjust the light spectrum to more blue. Okay, yeah, so I have no idea what you wrote there. Yeah, so any big swing, I'm going to guess if you use, if you just bought the coral, you put it in your tank, and it changed color, it's likely stressed from a parameter swing from the person's tank where you bought it from to your tank. So whether that's light or spectrum or alkalinity, there's probably some kind of a change, and it's probably still adapting to it. Now, some corals can be fairly hardy and they can deal stuff right away, and other ones, you know, they might take, you know, 6 weeks or a month or two to settle in before they're kind of happy and start to thrive again. So it could just be that stress or two from change. I have a very large crown leather. It's falling over to the side, 16-inch tall, 8 wide. How do I support it? You can prop with a rock. You definitely could prop with a rock. It's probably the stem of it's not as tough, right? So it's probably starting to like limp over to the side. You could frag off the base and move the whole thing lower if you want to keep like the big crown on it. But yeah, I would probably just frag it back down a bit. Bought a small green Monty frag for $10. Now it's the size of a small tea plate. It has orange tips on the side. Ah, very nice. Sounds pretty cool. Orange and green's a nice one. I have one that's green with orange polyps. I think it's called the Grinch Monty. This guy's been super happy. Okay, so in my previous tanks, I had Montiporas, plating Monties, and they were super cool, but over time they took up a lot of real estate. And I was like, hey, nope, no more Monties, blah, blah, blah. So no more Monties in this. But I broke down and I added this guy, the Worldwide Corals Grafted Monty. Just the orange and the green just look super cool together. So I added this one lower in the tank so that it can't overshadow stuff. It's going to stick pretty low, close to the sand bed if it does. But yeah, so that brings into another consideration is how are the corals going to grow? How fast are they going to grow? How much space are they going to take up? So at least if this grows, it's going to be pretty close to the sand beds, so there's nothing that's going to shade. In my old tank, I had them high up, so it's starting to shadow corals below it, and then you got to break it off, and you get weird, funny shapes, and it doesn't look natural anymore. So knowing how a coral is going to grow, how fast it's going to grow, is all good considerations. So like you get your tiny frag, just Google it and look at photos of colonies. If you have something like an F-flow, it's going to be like a solid plate that kind of grows outwards, right? Versus one that branches out, and it may not be as big of a deal for shading long term. Now, the other consideration too is shading. So if you are going for more acro heavy or mixed reef tank, eventually corals are going to grow over and shade the stuff below it. Now that could be an advantage if you want to put low light corals below, but if you have one acro growing over another acro and shading it, it might not be happy. So that's might be where you want to add more light to your tank long term, or something to consider just for placement. Red Sea forever. Monties grow fast. They definitely do. I have a huge Hollywood chalice that was bad and no one wants frags anymore. Hollywood Stunner grows like a weed. That one is super fast. I'm assuming that's the one you're talking about. But that guy's definitely a quick grower. Speaking of color contrast, posted a pic a while ago, 2 chalices that are happily growing together. Look pretty cool. Well, different one, but I'm kind of seeing here like the blue beside the yellow, like just the cool colors it gets, like growing together, perfectly happy. You can see the Miami hurricane vice, whatever it is starting to puddle up and grow over the other one a little bit. But if I look right now, like they're growing together and they're perfectly fine. So on that, other coral I get all the time is what corals can touch. Now, generally the same family or species can touch. Now there's going to be like subspecies and offshoots where it's not always compatible, like Micromusa lords versus just Micromusa, or just acans, like the acan in Pastria, whatever it is, acan achinata. Those are mean. Those cannot touch anything. Anything they touch, they're basically going to like try and kill. So super nasty. Give those guys lots of space. You know, chalices, as you can see, not all chalices can touch, but most of them have been okay in my experience. Does your lower alk slow coral growth? Is there a way to slow coral growth? If you want your corals to grow slower, lower pH and less light will probably slow down the coral growth. Yeah, if you want to slow your tank growth. That's the thing. When your tank is new, everyone wants it to grow fast and fill in. But, you know, maybe 5 years down the road, your tank's packed and you're too lazy to frag and you want to grow slower. So maybe you want to, like, inject some CO2 in your tank or something, lower the pH, suppress the growth a bit, which is funny, but it could be, you know, a long-term problem that might come up. If the base of 2 acros meet, how serious is coral warfare? So that depends on the acros. Some of them are completely fine. They don't necessarily sting each other, but they will grow over top of each other. Like, for instance, here, we got the Pac-Man Deepwater and Rainbow Loom. So this is just before they're touching. Now, they're actually touching now. And the Rainbow Loom is actually starting to do like a bit of like a fist. So it's starting to go bloop and grow over top of that chunk of the Deepwater, or the Pac-Man Acro. So it is kind of crazy. So they're not fighting, but again, it's trying to block its light from him and shade it. And that's how it's fighting in a way. So yeah, basically our tanks are slow motion battles of coral. Hello from SARK, welcome. So yeah, so basically everything in our tank wants to win, and over a long enough period, something is going to take over, something's going to win. It's inevitable. If we start with small little tiny frags, it just means it's going to take longer. If you start with bigger chunks, it'll happen quicker. And that is a big consideration of why you need to leave lots of space for corals to grow, right? I would want to leave, you know, at least, you know, ideally 3 inches between every frag, or the more the better. But just know it's going to happen eventually. When and how long it takes is just depends how fast the grower is, you know, how mature your tank is. Chris, I have so many softies that I'm constantly raising my alkalinity. It's always low. Best solution to maintain. About a dosing pump, what would you suggest on dosing solution? Calculate ppm. If you're only dosing one thing to your tank, or a single dosing pump, something like Alpha Reef, if you have a low demand tank, one solution, super duper easy. So that is a nice easy way to do it. There is a bazillion different products out there. I've used tons of them. Any one you dose for alkalinity, they're all similar. Some of them have added like trace elements and other stuff mixed into it. For just a softy tank, honestly, like pick any brand, is probably gonna do the job for you. The biggest thing is just have a consistent dose with it. So generally I would use, if you're figuring out your dose, test your tank, wait 24 hours, test again, and see how much it changes. Then go to a dosing calculator, say, okay, my tank is 8.5 and I want to be 8.7, and it'll tell you how much to dose. And take that amount and then set your dose to dose that over 24 hours. 24 hours later, test again. And if it's the exact same number it was yesterday, then your doser's dialed in. If it's a little high, a little low, then just tweak your dose up or down a little bit and just till you get it done. So that's kind of the basics of how you start dosing your tank. Now, this is kind of off topic a little bit, but going to like something like, I use calcium reactors mainly because I love the stability of it, but it has the downfall of lower pH. So stability is great for growth, low pH not so good for growth. So it's a trade-off for sure. But there's certain ones. And so speaking of polyps, that guy, super shaggy. So polyps out, always a good sign that corals are happy. Milliporas are one of my absolute favorites just because I love those shaggy polyps. It just looks super cool. Hello, Mets Dynasty X. Planet 3D, welcome guys, KB. I'm dosing Triton, not much, about 3 mils a day with elk. Yeah, so like my old Red Sea nano tank that I had, all the rock flowers, all that stuff in, that was a pretty solid mixed reef. And that one, I think I only ever dosed 2 or 3 days a week, 2 or 3 mils a day. And I think I was doing the Brightwell ones at the time. And super basic, did that and water change, that was it. KB, do you dose trace minor elements like iodine or just water changes? So I'm going to say yes to all. So I do a little over a gallon, 10,000 mils a day, 2.5 gallons a day on my big tank. My frag tank hardly ever gets a water change because I have to do it manually. My big tank is automated, so it gets 2.5 gallons a day water change. Now I also do dose trace on it, so 2 different things. So I have the Brightwell Replenish is kind of like a broad spectrum single solution for dosing trace elements. So I do that. I do the Chaeto Grow, and I do some aminos. Now I do that as kind of like my automated daily dosing. And I'm also been dabbling for a while with the Reef Moonshiners, which is kind of like Triton in a way. It's a spin-off of that, his own kind of version. Now I do use that. I was doing that daily. I've been a bit of slacker lately, but I do a ICP test once in a while, and I'll use that to readjust all my levels and kind of keep things in check. So I might actually have him on my stream next week, so that could be an interesting one. So if you want to know about trace, that should actually be a really good one next week. But yeah, definitely. So trace, okay. I get asked all the time, do you need trace elements? You do not, if you do water changes, you do not need to do trace elements. However, if you do them, you can get some better coloration out of some of your corals. Which elements from the water definitely do tweak the colors of some of them. Like with this, I'm mainly talking about SPS and Acropora. So it is something that you can consider. Reef Sea Forever. Use a Versa to drip calc makeup water. I still want to set up an auto water change. Waiting on some Versa still. Oh, I know, it's crazy. Everything's crazy with stock these days. But yeah, it's a solid system. I'm using the calc on mine too. It's just a consistent drip. Someone was asking me earlier too, how much do I dose of it? I have it just continuous at like 1 point whatever mils a minute. So it's just a very slow continuous drip of calc. And I'm doing it on both my tanks now. Trace is important if you have a lot of coral, especially with Acropora. I don't know how important it is for like SPS and LPS, but Acros it definitely is. Now, if you do big water changes, you're probably low on them, but it's probably not depleted, where if you never do water changes, you're definitely going to be more depleted on certain elements. And it's not saying your coral's not going to grow, it just might not be as vibrant, or, you know, maybe it's more pale instead of being like a deeper red. Like it's, a lot of that vibrance is one of the big things with that. But like you have a softy tank, like you probably don't need to worry about it. You know, even LPS, I don't think it's as important, but better late than never. Sure is. What's going on BC 749? So what's some other cool ones to talk about here? Yeah, so like even, another prime example. Zoas all around the base of this guy. Those are purple monsters around. I don't even know what coral that is. But again, the coral is perfectly fine. No really issues with the base of that one. So I will say some were probably annoyed, but for the most part, I find it to be okay. Let's pretend you are building a house and you anticipate 500 gallons of water in your system. Sounds pretty sweet, Glenn. How many water storage containers would you get? I would get one really big one. Those big white poly vertical containers, I would just get whatever biggest one you can fit. 2 of them, depends on your space, obviously. But do one for saltwater, one for RODI. RODI is double duty, a massive auto top off, / whenever you need more salt water, you got your thing right there to mix it up. But heck yeah, Glenn, that's gonna be a sweet tank. Everybody's always low on iodine and bromine when you get your test back. I actually was high on iodine. Now it must be one of the trace elements that I dosed last time. Iodine can definitely make a difference. I find zoas and a lot of those type of corals really appreciate iodine a bit more. Totally new to this. I rescued a 50-gallon flex tank with a clown, xenia, and 2 tiny astrina stars. What do I do next? Well, if you just got the tank, let it settle in for a bit first before you really change much. Xenia is super easy, so you don't have to worry too much about that. Clownfish, they're pretty hardy and easy. Astrina stars, some consider them a pest. I mean, if you only got 2 in there and they're fun, let them be in there. But personally, if you're getting more into reef tanks, I'd probably add a couple zoas or something easy like that next. Keep it just a nice, easy, low maintenance tank. Lewis, 20-gallon cube, having trouble with torches. SPS Acros, Millies, Monties grow well. Thoughts? Too much flow. Too much flow can definitely annoy a torch. First thing is, I would just try moving it to a spot with lower flow in your tank. Like if your tank's here and your power head's here going around, maybe put your torch over there, right? So he'll be, this is your power head, put your torch over here. Something like that, just so it gets more indirect flow rather than getting blasted. Can zoas handle high flow? I find most can. So with zoas, if they are high flow, they'll tend to be more compact. And if they're lower, this is a mixture of lighting and flow. If in high flow, they tend to be smaller and tighter. And if they are in low flow, think about this. Okay, so high light, they'll tend to be a little more compact. Low light, they'll be longer stalks and reaching out more. Same with the flow, right? If they're really high flow, that tends to be tighter together. If they're low flow, they'll be more bushy out. Zoas, higher flow, long eyelashes. I don't know if there's a direct correlation there. I've been trying to figure out if there's anything that does the eyelash thing to make them longer or not. But yeah, I find zoas for the most part can adapt to almost anything. Like they seem to be all around super hardy. Speaking of long lashes, those guys are like one of my faves. Those lazy lashes, crazy long. I got those at ReefDudes a couple years ago, but the lashes on those guys are insane. Yeah, if you're just starting out, definitely watch a lot of videos. This hobby is never-ending learning. You're always going to be learning. You're never going to learn it all, but I think that's kind of what makes the hobby fun. Another one, just kind of like on the whole color theory thing. If you look at, those 2 side by side, they don't stand out as much. But then if you look at, those ones side by side, you see more pop. So I don't know. I really starting to pay a lot more attention to color pop on things and just contrasting colors. And again, healthy corals, polyps out, good sign. So always like to see those polyps out. Just don't do anything quickly. Don't trust anyone ever. Do your own research. Okay, so yeah, don't do any drastic changes. Again, always go slow with this hobby. They say nothing good happens fast, which for the most part is true. Take your time. Don't rush anything. Research the heck out of it. You're very late, Brymac. We're almost an hour in. So speaking of flow, good little clip there. You can see the little polyps dancing around. So seeing good movement in polyps is definitely good. I am a big fan of randomizing your flow too. I know sometimes people will have just like the basic standard power heads where it's just on 24/7. And that can be harder on some corals being blasted on the same side, where they like a little bit of variation, so it's mixing it up and not just hitting the same spot 24/7. So at least on my power heads, I mainly use the Vortex just because I love the magnet and the wires in the tank, but the Reef Crest mode is the one that's on 95% of the time because it just randomizes up and down. I know like Jabos have their Ouse mode and some other stuff, but it's good. Good old PUBG. It's a good game. I haven't played that in a few weeks. KB, any tips on acans? For some reason, my tank gets older. They don't seem to be doing as well as they did in the past. Do you feed your acans is my first question. Acans really benefit from being fed. So I would feed them, once or twice a week. And that should definitely help them plump up and be more colorful. Are you meticulous about keeping records and logs on your tank? Back when I manually tested my tank, I used a Google spreadsheet and I would put all my results in there. I'd try to test weekly. I was really good in the beginning, then I became more of a slacker over time. But overall, it is good to track things. If something, even like when I change my RDI filters, I'll try and put it in my little spreadsheet because I'm like, oh, how long ago did I change this sediment filter, this carbon filter? So it is good to have those logs. And a lot of times if you dose or something changes in your tank, you might see some fallout of something that you did that made some corals not happy, but it's not right away. Sometimes it won't show up for a few weeks until you can actually see it. So that's why it's good to have that log. So you can look back and be like, okay, what did I change in the last, 6 to 8 weeks? And you'll get like a better idea from there, just because there is that delay on a lot of things. And like we were talking earlier about polyp bailout, that could have been something that happened a couple weeks ago, and you could just be finally seeing it now. A lot of times, if corals aren't happy, they're already stressed out, and it could just take something to push it over the edge, right? But it's usually a buildup of stressors over time, which is where having that history can kind of help out. I have learned everything from reefing on YouTube, Reef to Reef. I have ReefDudes videos up there to my knowledge. Thanks, Mike. Appreciate it. Any tips on bubblegum forest fire digi? Mine are more finicky macros. I 100% agree with you. My forest fire in my tank it's there, it exists. I wouldn't call it thriving by any stretch of the imagination. Like, it's alive, it grows a little bit, but that is one coral. There's 2 corals that have never done like amazing for me, and that is one of them. You can kind of see it right there. It's just not as colorful as I would like, and it's there, but that and Red Planet, those 2 corals, they're like nemesises for me. But yeah, my forest fire is not nearly as exciting as it should be, not overly happy. So that is one I cannot give you tips on because it's just a really weird coral in my tank. It just never is happy. Where in general, any other DG is perfectly fine. Like, every other one's been happy for me. Another one, actually, I guess it's more of a Montipora than a digi, but the Stiletta Montipora, that thing has been growing like a weed in my tank. Super cool though, because it has super fuzzy polyps, but I need more coral photos so I can pull them up when I'm talking about them. But yeah, that guy definitely grows like crazy, super duper fuzzy polyps. That's a really good one I'd recommend for someone trying some first acros in a tank. Once I find it, but it is that guy right between the 2 tanks, or that bright green one. That is Stiletta Montipora, and it is a branching one. It grows super fast. I find it to be super hardy and super fluffy polyps. So I'd say that's a really good beginner acro for someone who want to try a first one. Do you feed your acans at night when the tentacles are out? Also, anything besides reefroids? I feed them at random times. Reefroids works well. There is some of the Brightwell powder one I feed randomly. I feed the Reef Nutrition ones randomly. The Canalus is good. There's the oyster juice stuff. When you're feeding mysis to the fish, sometimes if the fish get all the big stuff, you get that little bit left over inside the cup as you melt it. I'll feed that as well. I wouldn't say there's anything specific I'd feed them, but I mix it up. Variety is the spice of life, right? Like some corals might like one food better, other corals might like another food better, which is why I just make a soup of a lot of different types of foods. And that way, one of them might really get benefits from, one food, and another one might get a lot of benefit from another food. So it's really good to mix it up. Where do you keep your NO3 and PO4 at? Well, It is awful on one tank and excellent on the other tank. On my frag tank, they are both extremely low, like super duper low, my frag tank. And on my water box tank, my nitrates are actually less than 10, which is amazing for me. I think they're like 7 or 8 now, but my PO4 is like 0.14 or something like that. So I got to get that down because the ratio is way off. And I have little bits of cyano and stuff in there, and it's possible because they're out of whack. So I need to up the GFO or use a little more lanthium. I got to do something to kind of get that fixed up in my tank. My nemesis is that Digi and Strawberry Shortcake. Strawberry Shortcake. That one, I had lost mine, so no tips on that one. I did have a nice chunk in here, and that one... I can't quite see it in here. It wasn't there. I lost it a while back. Made me sad. Do you dip new corals straight out of the box mail, or do you quarantine and then dip? I'm getting corals tomorrow, setting up a temporary quarantine. If you have a quarantine, that is the better way to go. Historically, in the past, my first like 5 years of reefing, I probably dipped everything right away before it went into the tank. And awesome for pests. However, it is hard on corals, especially if you just brought it home from the LFS or somewhere, have at her, dip her right away. It's probably fine. If you shipped a coral and it took a day or two to get there, it's already going to be stressed from shipping. So a dip afterwards could push it over the edge. And sometimes you're going to lose stuff from the dip. So it depends. Now, I personally have dipped. However, I think if you can put in a quarantine tank, like an observation tank, that would be better. And then maybe you don't even dip it right away. Maybe you let it sit in there for a week or two, and then you dip it before it goes in your tank. And I think you're going to cause a lot less stress to the coral. Now, that being said, not everybody wants to have that secondary tank for a quarantine tank for corals. So, food for thought. But I remember one of the videos I watched Worldwide recently. I don't even know if they dipped them right away. Like, they literally just had it in quarantine for like a month, and they moved it to another quarantine. It like hopped through a bunch of quarantine systems. Now, another thing that you could do, which if you weren't going to dip it or if you're going to mount it right away, a lot of times people break off the base. So they'll take, if that's the frag plug and your coral's in there, break it off the frag plug. Because a lot of the pests will hide on the frag plug or at the base of the coral. Now, the other thing you could do is just break it off right at the bottom. If you have like a coral saw, you could chop it off so that you're leaving the base behind. Now, it sucks to lose a bit of base. I know. It pains me every time I've done it. However, in general, most pests hide at the base of a coral. So you're going to eliminate a huge chunk of it just by removing that base off. I used to feed my acans, but the vermitid still started to multiply like crazy, so I stopped. Now, with that, KB, just spot feed them. Turn off your flow. Get a big syringe. Something like this. This is the little Julian's thing from Two Little Fishies. The little tip isn't on it right now, but get something like this, and you can just suck it up, turn off your flow, and just spot feed it, and just get a little food in each one of the mouths. You can even just broadcast feed just over top of like a little dome above them, and then the food will fall into them, and then ideally you get some food to each mouth, and then it'll be a lot happier. They said they dip them every week. Yeah, so I mean, if the place you're buying from dips their stuff on a regular basis, you're probably a lot safer. I mean, there's always going to be a risk, right? It's never guaranteed. There's always some risk. So take your chances if you're not going to dip, but you're probably a lot safer buying for someone that does dip on a regular basis. But yeah, I have thought about setting up a coral quarantine tank a bazillion times. One day I might do it, but I do think that is the best way to go if you can. Yeah, this guy is growing like bananas in my tank. He's getting huge. So, showing the difference, this guy is probably like this big now in my tank, whereas that little Hellfire has nothing for vertical growth, but is based like crazy. Where this one did barely any basting and is putting its effort into the branches. Thanks for your advice. Love your show. Thanks so much, Brian. Much appreciated. How do you keep your fib from eating food from the corals? My wrasses and copper bands go for it. Okay, so I generally feed the fish first. generally, like if I feed frozen mice. This is probably like my main daily food, and I will mix up a bunch. I'll feed all the fish first, and then I'll feed the corals. If you feed just the corals on their own, the fish are hungry, they're going to go for it. Where if you give them a bunch of big meaty food and other stuff first, then they're less likely to steal from the corals. Now, there's always exceptions if you have stuff, any type of shrimp, right? Like if you got, peppermints, cleaner, fire shrimp, any of those shrimp are punks. They're going to go and try and rip that food out of the coral's mouth. Sometimes I'll sit there with my little stick and kind of chase them away and give the corals a chance to eat. But so sometimes you got a little intervention, but in general, yeah, feed the fish first and you'll have more hope feeding the corals. Or what I tend to do is just broadcast feed the whole tank. My tank is just a cloudy big mess for half an hour, 45 minutes. All the corals have a chance to get the particles out of the water. It's not as good as spot feeding, but it's easier and it goes everywhere. Now, again, I have a filter roll on there, so at least, once feed mode is over, it's going to get caught up at the filter and it's going to clear it out after that. Now, again, if you have socks, it might get plugged up a little bit quicker, but food for thought. I was feeding Red Sea Reef Energy AB+, but had a huge green hair algae bloom. I don't know if that's related. I do have Reef Energy AB+. I do feed it randomly. Probably once a week, maybe sometimes twice a week, sometimes not at all. It's in my little mini fridge. It's kind of like when I think about it. This is why I'm a big fan of automation, because I know I'm going to forget things. So amino acids definitely do have benefits to corals. I do have some on a doser, and I do manually add some randomly at the times. If you are spot feeding your corals, though, it is always a good idea to mix it in with the powder foods in your water, and then you can spot feed with it, and you're getting it direct to the source. It's just going to be less of it wasted in the water column or straight out your protein skimmer. Now, when I feed the tank, too, I put my tank into feed mode for about 45 minutes, and I turn off the return pump, but I let the power heads keep going. That way it's going to circulate the food, so it's going to keep a lot of those particles suspended throughout the tank, and give more time or a chance for corals to catch those polyps, those particles out of the water. Chili Willie's Reef. Hey, Devin, I have a nasotang and observation tank going on 2 weeks. He's looking great. Would you recommend adding copper to the tank or just keep a look on him? So personally, I would not add copper unless you think there is an issue. Copper is a stressor to the fish. Now, there's a couple of considerations. If you have if you haven't used copper on all your fish you're putting in the tank, there's likely something in your tank. So it's probably less of a risk. On the flip side, if you have an established tank and tons of fish, do you want to risk introducing something new? So if you've always quarantined and done it properly, then definitely I would do it. If you've never done it, then you got to weigh the risk of what if this fish brought in something versus the rest of your fish. If he's quarantined anyways, I'd probably do something like ProziPro, which is going to take care of internal parasites. I tend not to like to do copper for no reason, just because it is hard on fish, and I have, seen people lose fish from quarantining because they've stressed the fish out. Now, most healthy fish, I feel, ick or a lot of the common stuff, they'll have no issue fighting it off if they're healthy. If they're stressed out and their immune system's weak, it's going to be harder on them. So I would probably use a bit of ProziPro and probably just watch them for a bit. If you are worried there's something, out of all the copper stuff that I've used, I like Copper Power the best. I find it's one of the gentler ones in my experience. It seems to be fairly successful with it, so I'd look into that one. Do purple stylos get white tips or just the Milka variant specifically? Mine is purple throat. Mine's purple throat as well. The one behind me in the background there. It is, purple stylo or cat's paw, whatever many name you want to pick. I've never seen white tips on it, so I'm going to assume it is just one of the different strains of it that has the white tips. AB plus algae boom. So I've dosed it. I don't have algae. I don't really have any algae in my tank. Frag tank, Aptasia galore. That sucks. My big reef tank, I don't really have any algae in there, but I do have bits of cyano, which I got to deal with, and it's possibly from my imbalance with my low nitrates and high phosphates, so I need to work on that one. St. Nova, and I have 0 PO4 generally on the phosphate. So 0 is bad. You do not want 0. If you have 0, you are starving your corals for phosphates. And corals, like a plant or animal or anything else, they do need phosphates and nitrates. So you never want 0. You want something in there. It can be low, but as long as it's readable on your test kit. So if there's 0, you could dose phosphates specifically, like there's like neophos and stuff like that. However, I personally just like to feed the tank more. So yeah, I would just up your feed into your tank, feed the corals more, get some more nutrients in the water just so your tank isn't 0, and your corals will probably be happier for it. Brimac, I've always used copper power too, never had any problems losing fish. Yeah, exactly. For whatever reason, I feel like it's just the safer one. There's also the chloroquine phosphate. I'm mind blanking on what the product's called. I can't see it from where I'm sitting. But there is one that has chloroquine phosphate on it. And that one is... I don't know. I'll let you know if I can remember the name. Anyways, I find that one is pretty good too. Reef... Can't remember. But yeah, copper power, and if not, I'd use the chloroquine phosphate one over top of the copper ones personally. Okay, so Paul, Devin, what are the side effects of high or low potassium? So, high potassium. So elevated potassium, in theory, can actually bring out colors. Just stay on top of your test and your copper. Yeah, so if you are treating a tank with copper, it needs to stay within that therapeutic range. If you are going to quarantine something and use copper, buy the copper HANA test kit. At least for me, I bought 2 different test kits, and I could not read them for the life of me, like the little liquid ones. The subtle shades of the blue, whatever, were like impossible. So personally, if you're going to do it, I would just go straight for the copper HANA test kit, because that's the one I bought, just because impossible to read those colors. At least for me it was. Okay, so higher potassium can actually bring out some good coloration in your corals. Too high is trouble. So I've told this story before, but when I was dosing some potassium hydroxide for a while, amazing for pH. My pH skyrocketed, life was good, things were wonderful. I did an ICP test, and I realized that after a couple months of doing this, my potassium levels are like dangerously high. And I don't know if it was 550 or 650, one of the two. That was Chris from ACI told me. He's like, that's like danger zone. Like you can start losing stuff if you go above that number. I feel like it was 650. It might have been 550. I'll have to figure that out. But so with that, I did a huge water change, and I haven't really dosed potassium in ages because I've been letting it slowly drop. So too high potassium, potential for things to die off or start losing things. So too high is bad. Too low, you just won't have as good of colors. So a little bit of elevated potassium can improve coloration. Now, I did a video a while ago about how you can use potassium to kill off flatworms too. So that could be another one too if you guys are doing something like flatworms, activating flatworms, they're a bugger. But spraying the potassium on there can help kill them off in a spray bottle. So check out that video if you haven't seen that one. But yeah, potassium 400 is a safe level. I feel like it's either 550 or 650 that was like the danger zone. But yeah, 400 you're still good happy. I believe it's like 350 to 450 is a fairly safe range. A little bit fuzzy. I gotta go look at whatever my last ICP test and see what mine was at. But yeah, so in general, I mean, for the most part, corals aesthetically look at the colors and put contrasting colors beside each other, because it's going to make stuff pop more. Like, not the best example, but you can see the green behind the green kind of blends in, but you got like where the sunlight is, like the orange behind it with the green really pops. So definitely take into consideration which colors are side by side and try and put contrasting colors there. Now, also, the more important thing is make sure you're looking at where it has the best flow for it. If you have a standard tank, I mean, it's pretty easy to add more power heads or add more flow as you go. If you have like peninsula, like my tank is a lot more tricky because you don't want power heads all over the side because it takes away from the peninsula look. So certain things to consider. But personally, I like to mix up the colors. At least now I do. Never used to, but yeah. So let's talk about green and orange Monty. That guy's super cool polyps. But big thing is adequate light, adequate flow, and then once you have that, then start playing with like where stuff is going based off coloration. Ross Criddle, I don't even know how to say your name, I apologize. Any tips or hints on coloring up Dragon Soul Torch? I've seen mine lose yellow feeding par. I don't feed mine anything specifically. I'm going to guess it could be, it's likely lighting or flow in your tank. I just broadcast feed my tank, so it just gets what it catches, to be honest. So I don't really give it a ton of spot feeding. I'm going to, So mine are about 2/3 down the tank. And so it's kind of like low to moderate flow, right? Because they're 5 feet away from the power heads. It's a good chunk away. So which would leave lighting levels on there. 150, between 100 and 200 par should be plenty for them. Chili Willie's Reef, great advice. Thank you. Thank you very much for the $10 super chat, buddy. Nick, benefits of dosing vitamin C. I have never dosed vitamin C. I have read people claiming there's benefits to zoanthids and different things. I've never personally dosed vitamin C. Whether or not it makes a difference, I don't know. I've researched it, and I've never really found anything conclusive on there. So, I don't know if there's any difference on that one, to be honest. UV can increase the expression of fluorescent proteins. Okay. So the fluorescent UV definitely can help. The fluorescence that you see is kind of like the coral sunblock in a way. All those pigments that you're seeing it's zooxanthellae layer underneath the skin, and that's what gives you all the color. Now, I know at least for Acroporas, if you look at the super low nutrient tanks, they tend to have more paler corals. And that's because there's that thinner layer of zooxanthellae inside of the coral skin. Where if you have higher nutrients, you tend to get deeper, thicker colors. Now, I personally like a little bit of the deeper, richer colors. I also feel like that's a healthier coral in my experience. Now, I don't know how well that plays in the role for LPS. I don't know how, I'm not sure how that one plays in there. But feeding it definitely helps. ACANS 100% does. LPS coral will definitely accept food. Paul, yeah, Devil Soul loves to be fed. Went from 2 heads to 8 heads this March. Won't take fleshy foods, but reefroids do great. Yeah, so reefroids are super tiny little foods, and they do work well. That's usually whatever food I mix in, I usually throw a bit of that in as well. It's been tried and true over the years. And yeah, supposedly some people say it raises your phosphates, which some people, if you have an issue with phosphates, benefit, double up on the reefroids. So it's a good way to get them back up. Australian Duncans, love these guys. Again, most of these corals, the more you feed them, the faster they're going to grow. So my nitrates are too low in my system, but my PO4 is fine. No algae problems. Okay, so personally, I would just feed the tank more. Now, if you only want to raise phosphates, Neophos is a very popular one from Brightwell, and that is basically a liquid phosphate that you could put on a doser and dose it just to raise your phosphates back up. Now, I personally like to just feed the corals more because they're going to get benefits from the food, and it's going to raise your nitrates and phosphates. But you just got to make sure it's not going to feed it too much. Reef C, you need to fade your 8 cans or they'll disappear. I agree. They definitely will fade off if you don't feed them. They are much, much happier being fed, and I find the colorations much better if you feed them. Maybe more frozen. Yeah, so frozen food, I tend to feed mysis and canalus. I feed mysis for the fish daily, and a couple times a week I'll break in some canalus and mix that in as well. And then randomly I'll feed either the reef nutrition, the liquid foods, I'll do those randomly as kind of like a broadcast feed for corals. Once in a while I get motivated and spot feed, or some of the powder foods like the reefroids or the XC color something or other. I can't remember these names, but I'll usually mix those in and I'll make a bit of a soup. So it's not really just one product. I like to mix up a bunch of different things and get a bunch of different kind of nutrition-ish to feed to the coral. I noticed that when under 0.1 on PO4, my corals starve. Yeah, so coral, everyone's worried about nitrates and phosphates because they're scared of algae. Don't be worried about them because you will feed the corals. You're far better off to have some nutrients than have none, because at none you're starving your corals and they're not going to grow. Now, as your corals grow and they get bigger, they're going to absorb more nitrates and phosphates, so they're actually going to help. And long term, as you get big colonies, you're going to have no nitrate or phosphate issues because they're all being sucked up from your corals, right? So it's kind of that little catch-22. But you just, whatever you do, do not have zero of either. You're just going to cause problems for yourself. Always have some. Kyle, from what I've read, frozen or fresh foods will raise nitrates more. Powder pellets, flake foods will increase phosphate more. Yeah, so there you go. You could just tune your food mix based on what you want to do for nitrates and phosphates. The algae is a good sign to have to clean it. Now, the other thing is what kind of fish do you have in your tank? Just if you have little bits, if I could have algae in my peninsula, and I might not even know it because I have like 5 or 6 tangs in there, and they would just be constantly munching them up. So it's possible I have it, and then all these guys are just like munching it down. But I never see any, so I'm happy. Is it there, covered up? Possibly, who knows? The only algae, which is a bacteria that I've seen, is cyano, which is the one I gotta deal with a little bit there. But otherwise, yeah, things are pretty happy. All right, guys, it's been a good hour and a half, so I think I'm gonna wrap her up for today. But I appreciate everybody who joined today on the random live stream. If you guys do have any requests for future topics, let me know. Next week, I believe I have Andre from Reef Moonshiners coming on, which he is hardcore all about the trace elements and tweaking things based on it. It's like, that's going to be a good one. And I've been dabbling with that for a while, so I got some solid knowledge there, so I think it'll be a really good conversation. If you guys did enjoy today's stream, as always, hit that like button. Chili Willy, Rosby Reef, Tracy, Nick, Marvin, and Brian, thank you guys so much for the super chat. Much appreciated. And yeah, hopefully you guys enjoyed it, and I will catch you on